This loss at the headwaters of the North Saskatchewan River will of course have implications for water security in places like Edmonton. And it's interesting because most people expect me to talk about the South Saskatchewan. Who would have ever guessed that the North Saskatchewan would ever be in trouble? And a recent EPCOR-funded research project found that the North Saskatchewan is one of Canada's most vulnerable watersheds in terms of projected hydroclimatic changes and impacts. Whereas irrigation use is the dominant use here in the already troubled South Saskatchewan River Basin, most of the allocations for the North Saskatchewan, some 83%, are for industrial and municipal use. So it's anticipated that in the midst of the increase in withdrawals in the next 20 years for processing heavy oil at a series of newer expanded facilities in Edmonton, that water use could be 10 times the current allocation for the city of Edmonton. And a nuclear power generating station has been proposed for West Central Saskatchewan, which will also require a reliable water source. And what's interesting about this is just as is the case in this basin, increasing reliance on water from the North Saskatchewan River assumes a certain reliability of source. And this is one of the most interesting thing that is happening, is changes in the notions of reliability. The major risk from climate warming is a change in the availability of water resources, including the amount and timing between seasons, subbasins, and years. And the dramatic retreat of glaciers in the Rocky Mountains already reflects changes in the annual snowpack over time. So we can see from this that factors that have created the global water crisis, population growth, greater water demand, and diminishing supply are already present widely in Alberta. Dr. Gary Clark, now this is going to be a series of time projections here, so I want you to see this. Dr. Gary Clark of University of British Columbia did these projections. He's one of this country's most respected glaciologists. And what I want you to see here, and I picked this because many of you will have been in this area. There's two sequences here that I thought would be useful to you to see because they affect the region, but all of you will have been in these areas. This is the Icefield Parkway north of Lake Louise. And what we see are the major ice fields as they exist today. Starting at the bottom at the left, Waputtock, going up to the Wapta, which is the headwaters of the Bow, the Freshfield ice field, the Mons ice field, the Lyell, and then the one that many of you will undoubtedly have visited, the Columbia ice field itself. And what we've got here will show you a time-lapse projection of how much ice we anticipate having by 2100. And I want to point out this is not based on increased temperatures that may result as a result of potential climate warming. These projections are based on the changes that have taken place in glacial mass over the last 40 years. So if you can just start on this, you can start to see where we are, and if you can just go through this to 2100 slowly, you can start to see how these glaciers disappear. 2002, and can you carry on? Okay, just keep moving quickly through these. Now what's interesting about this is that these animations are going to be somewhat troubling to those who know the landscapes that they portray in an intimate way. So what you're seeing is the landscapes of the Mountain West changing. And you see how the changes would have taken place. Now I want you to see one particular glacier, and this is the Athabasca, which many of you visited. And again, these changes are projected over the next part of the century, but based on changes that have already taken place. No suggestion of future increased warming, but only the trends that have occurred over the last 40 years. So if you can go through this, and this is how we do it. You lay out the landscape topographically, you put the ice back on top of it, and then you use the volumetric analysis under a range. Go ahead. Okay, and just keep going through these. And as soon as you hit 60, you'll see what happens. It takes off. So that's what we anticipate happening to the Columbia ice field. And this is of great significance. That's good. This is really important because while glaciers may not be as significant in terms of total water supply as they once were because they've been shrinking for some time, what is happening to glaciers may be a warning of other far more significant threats. And we already know that long before global warming has finished reducing the length and depth of our glaciers, it will already be after our mountain snowpacks. And that's the thing I think we need to pay attention to. Because what happens here, changes in snowpack and the timing and depth of snowpack will alter dramatically what the water supply might be over time. But changes in snowpack are just the beginning of the changes that are beginning to converge upon us. And anticipating these changes, the past isn't really a very good and reliable future or a guide to the future. Next, please. Now, I want you to see this model a number of times. We should expect that the reduction in the amount of light reflected by ice and snow in this region will have further warming effects on climate. And these effects will cascade through both terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. So what kind of climate and what kind of landscapes might we expect in the future? This animation was done by Dan Fagre and his colleagues at the US Geological Service. And what they've done is create a model that depicts glacial recession and landscape change as a consequence of warming trends in Glacier Park in Montana. So watch this carefully as it goes through. This is the second time you can start to see it. It shows how Glacier National Park lost most of its glaciers over the last century and a half, but it also projects the warming trends we've experienced in the last century forward into time. And it shows how glaciers will retreat and how vegetation zones will rise. And we also see what happens to these vegetative zones over time. And what you can see from this, and I'll just go through this with you right from the beginning here, starting in 1860, you see massive glaciation. You see the glaciers gradually shrinking, and you see deglaciated landscapes without vegetation. You see alpine tundra cultivating or colonizing those deglaciated areas. You see bushes and willows, etc., rising up after the tundra. And then you begin to see forests appear. But watch what happens in the middle part of this century. What you see is grasslands moving in after the forest. And it's what's happening outside of the frame that is of greatest importance to you living in Okotoks. What we're watching outside of the frame, as this happens in the mountains, what we're watching is the desertification of the northern plains. And that will affect water security. The key point I want to make here is that we don't have as much water as we think we do, and we may have less than we have now in some places in the future. And I think we spend far too much time in this country worrying about water exports and not nearly enough time thinking about changes that are occurring within our own hydrological regimes. And this suggests another myth that we have to dispel, is that we're world leaders in water management. We're not. We are among the world's great water wasters and polluters. And the opportunity that exists here is in realizing that and changing that. Go ahead. One of the real opportunities in water management is water reuse. Treating and reusing wastewater has a number of advantages. It provides a way of expanding water supply without having to construct dams, dig new wells, or seed clouds with the hope of generating increased rainfall. Reclaimed water represents a renewable supply that literally increases in lockstep with population growth. Use of reclaimed water, however, has been a source of real conflict in some communities. While people seem not to mind drinking water that has been treated after upstream use, there appears to be a stigma against drinking water reclaimed from your own sewer systems. But unfortunately, in many places, water is becoming too precious to use only once before it's released downstream. But there are a number of concerns that water reuse puts into relief that could become sources of serious dispute and real conflict in the future. And the first of these concerns is a number of harmful substances that are being released into the environment. And because of its remarkable qualities as a solvent, almost every substance we produce seems somehow to find its way into water. Economists around the world are now warning of an emerging new scarcity that will affect every sector of the economy. And this growing scarcity is defined by very real limits that are becoming all too apparent in the capacity of the environment and our water to absorb and neutralize the unprecedented streams of waste humanity releases into it. And the gravity of this problem is only becoming apparent to us now as we realize that we ourselves are becoming walking contamination sites. In a recent Canadian study, a number of Canadians were tested for the presence of 88 harmful substances in their bodies. A First Nations volunteer from a remote community in Hudson's Bay was found to have 51 of the chemicals within her body. Blood and urine samples from a Toronto mother were found to contain 38 reproductive and respiratory toxins, 19 chemicals that disrupt hormones, and 27 carcinogens. One of my colleagues was part of that study. She discovered that she carried around in her body 26 carcinogens, 15 hormonal disruptors, 14 respiratory toxins, and 35 reproductive and development toxicants. One of the greatest concerns related to waterborne contamination is the issue of endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptors are substances that mimic or interfere with the function of hormones in the body. Over the past 20 years, concerns have been raised about observed increases in endocrine-sensitive health outcomes. According to the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences in the United States, breast and prostate cancer are on the rise, and there has been an approximately 50% decrease in sperm count worldwide over the second half of the century. So as I noted, virtually every human-made substance finds its way into water. And a recent study in Alberta identified 105 pharmaceuticals, hormones, and endocrine-disrupting compounds in raw municipal sewage. And after treatment, 48 of these contaminants of emerging concerns were still found in the effluent released into the river. Unfortunately, it's neither technically nor economically feasible to perform the kinds of detailed analyses necessary to declare this vast swirl of chemicals safe for humans or for the environment. In his book, Unquenchable, America's Water Crisis and What to Do about it, Robert Glennon reports that up to 90% of the drugs we take leave our bodies unchanged and still active. And Glennon goes on to joke that none of this is going to mean anything to anyone until men start getting uncontrollable erections from somebody else's Viagra. Now, the point of this very uncomfortable digression is that for the last 6 generations, the mantra of water managers has been that the answer to pollution is dilution. And evidently that's not so. And as more of us populate the planet, there's no way around the need for water reuse. We're entering an era, however, when we're going to need new standards and substantial innovation in water treatment. And many of these innovations are already available, but they're expensive, but they're going to be necessary for reasons of our collective health. But there's more to this problem than just making sure that technology works. We're going to have to better monitor and more effectively reduce the sources of such contaminants.